So with that, let's go ahead and let's begin our discussion today. So as I mentioned, we have two speakers, Shamichael Hallman, who's currently Senior Library Manager of the Historic Cosset Library in Memphis, Tennessee. Shamichael has been leading the reimagining of the Civic Commons initiative at the Cosset Library, which has been a multi-year, multi-million-dollar renovation that is scheduled to open this fall. And it is located in the heart of Memphis. And it's being designed to adapt the ever-changing needs of the community, which include co-working, workshops, recording studios, performance art space. And so it was great to see some of this in action this past week, but today we want to hear a little bit more about sort of the bigger picture idea of change and transformation around this institution. Then next we'll hear from Desa Cosma, who's the Executive Director of Detroit Disability Power, who's working to grow the organizing power of the disability community and to continue bridging the gap between the disability community and larger social justice movements. She has a particular interest in disability-focused political work that is grounded in anti-racism and economic justice. And we've invited Desa here today to talk about what change and transformation looks like on a movement scale. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Shamichael.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And can everybody hear me okay? Am I good, Ellie? Am I good? Okay, cool. All right. I know I'm in an area where the Wi-Fi is a little shaky, so I appreciate your understanding of that. And I do really also appreciate the rules of engagement, and I love that idea of kind of shared accountability. I think it's an amazing thing to have. So I am in Memphis, Tennessee. I manage the Cosset Library, and as I shared some time back, I think last week, or Cosset has this very rich history. The library system has a very rich history. We think about our public libraries, and I think many of us have relatively fond memories of the library. And even now, use it in many ways. Cosset dates back to the 1880s when the work actually started, and then the building actually opened to the public in 1893. And I go back sometimes and look at the flyer, at kind of the invitation of that day, and the gentleman who was kind of dedicating the building that day said that this will be the People's University, right? That it would be the place that the everyday person would have access to recorded knowledge and information. And certainly the library has tried to remain true to that. As Ellie said, I've been leading this effort now to renovate this building for about the last 4.5 years. We closed the building down in January of 2018. And thought that it might take us a couple of years, about 2 years, to get the work done. But it has taken a little bit longer than that. I tell people now, I think I understand why people just tear buildings down and start fresh. After all the things that we've gone through in this process, I totally get it. But I'm glad we didn't do that with this building. It's a beautiful building. A lot of the work certainly, is with the renovation of the building, the design of the building. That gets talked about a lot. But there's also other things that are kind of happening behind the scenes that I think are equally as important. Memphis, like Detroit, it's just an amazing city. There is a tremendous amount of talent, a tremendous amount of creativity and innovation that is within individuals and organizations and institutions. And we recognize that. We also recognize that there are issues there, that there are I often talk about for the kind of roughly the first 60 years of the library, of Cosset Library, Black people had little to no access to this branch. There was actually another branch that was built about a mile down the road that was known as the Vance Avenue Negro branch, and that's where Black folks went. And as you can imagine, that library got resources that were passed down. There were hand-me-down books, things that were discarded. And I love one thing I love about kind of Black librarians, women librarians. They took those scraps and really did some tremendous programming with them. I had an opportunity, and so what happened is in the spring of 1960, there are a number of sit-ins and demonstrations at that branch. It really kind of started even a few years before that with lawsuits by Black people. But there were a number of sit-ins that happened at Cosset Library, where Black folks just said, hey, there were young college students who said, hey, we're not going to leave this branch until you give us equal access to this branch. And it seems like that was kind of a very long time ago, but it really wasn't. And one of the things, and I shared this in the presentation last week, one of the most kind of chilling moments for me was to be able to sit down with that group just a few years ago, to sit down with them and to hear them talk about what it was like to see their arrest records, to see all these pictures that they have of being arrested, and many of them were ostracized from their community. Their parents didn't want them involved in these sort of activities. They lost scholarships, some of them. They lost jobs, some of them, right? And I was sitting down with them, and one of the older ladies said, hey, it seemed like it was a long time ago, but it wasn't. And many of the people that did not want us in this branch have had children and grandchildren and have passed that same mindset down to them, right? So there's still a lot of fight to do. So I say that to say that not only is there a tremendous amount of creativity and innovation and energy in the people and the organizations, there's also a history of oppression and oppressive practices that have held people down. And so we try to kind of balance both of those, right? And so we first, as a library, we honor that. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge that, hey, this happened. The library doesn't get a clean pass. The library has to acknowledge this thing that has happened in our past, and we have to pay honor and homage to the people who paved the way for this, right? That it's not just the people, the lawyers who tried the case. It's not just the judges who tried the case, but it was the protesters. It was the agitators. It was the activists that got to that place. And we cannot, acknowledge the lawyers and the officials without acknowledging the activists and the agitators, right? Because it's really because of them. And so in the building, as a part of our renovation efforts, we are putting a mural that speaks to that. And we are in the process now of actively collecting every name of every person who was a part of those sit-ins and demonstrations, right? We want that to be front and center when you walk in the door to say, hey, this is the history of this library. These are this is not the complete history, but this is a crucial and integral part of the history. And we want you to know the names of everybody who was involved in this, right? We're going to always keep this front and center, because, at any point in time, we could fall back to that. Right? And then kind of the second part of this is we then begin to with an asset-based view of the community, begin to look outward, right? To recognize that, number one, there are a number of issues in our city around you can name it: transportation, education, access to medical care, housing, any number of things, right? That intersect with libraries in multiple ways. And so our first kind of step is to develop this asset-based view of the community that says, hey, there are other people that are doing this work, that we're not the only ones out here that are doing great work. There are many other organizations, many other individuals, collectives, sororities, fraternities, churches, there are other people that are doing the work. All right. And perhaps the best thing that we can do is to figure out where they're already doing work and insert ourselves into that work, right? That we're not coming in our own objective, our own agenda, and getting these people to join. Certainly we have a set of principles that govern a library and kind of what we stand for, but we really want to kind of root ourselves into the community, right? And that allows for some really, really amazing partnerships. It allows for us to look at a range of organizations in the city and figure out, what's the sweet spot? How do we come together to serve each other in a way that really kind of magnifies the work that we can do in the community, right? And I'll talk a little bit about some of those partnerships in just a minute. The second piece of that is to acknowledge that, hey, there are also individuals here that are super talented, right? that we can allow, that we can take our platform and amplify their work, that we can take our platform and invite them in to be able to talk about some of the amazing things that they do. And so I'll talk a little bit about both of those. The first one is kind of that human, that person to person piece, right? I talked about in the presentation last week that we did a number of community engagement activities, asking the community questions around, what do you want to see in this library? What sort of resources do you need? Talk about books, talk about programs that you'd like to see, right? And we got all sorts of information. But then we also asked two very, very important questions. The first question was not only what do you want to see, but what would you like to contribute? What gift, what skill, what talent, what knowledge base do you have that you might like to contribute to this space, right? And what ended up happening, and what we have now, is this very interesting database of people who said, hey, I want to learn how to play the guitar. I want to learn how to launch my business. I want to learn how to sew or knit. I want to learn how to be a better whatever, right? And then on the other side of people who said, hey, I want to teach somebody this amazing skill that I have. I want to be able to take my professional experience and help someone learn how to code, help someone do their taxes, help someone avoid some of the bumps along the road that I did, right? I've got a little lived experience now. And what we discovered is that while people have some hesitancy about doing that in private spaces, that they're more than willing to do that in public space, right? A place that provides some safety, a kind of it's understood that, hey, I can go to this place, as a trusted place, right? And so a lot of our work, particularly I think from a transformative place, is for us as a library to move away from a staff-driven programming model to a community-driven programming model where we're doing this collectively in a kind of a non-exploitative way, right? Because you can easily get to a place where you're abusing people's talent, you're taking advantage of them. But to establish a collective where we've got a roster of people who say, hey, I'm more than willing to give 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter, a year of my time to help my fellow Memphians advance, learn something new, do something, meet somebody new, that sort of thing, right? And so I think, number one, that's going to be an amazing space for us, because that, to me, it almost balances out the power, right? Because right now that a lot of that power is held in the hands of librarians, right? And library managers. They get to decide what programs are there. They get to decide how often a program is. And to now release some of that power to the hands of the community, where now not only does the community get to say, hey, we love to see this particular program or that particular program. No, we actually get to be a part of making that thing happen, right? So I think that is number one, a very, very transformative thing in and of itself. And it is a challenging model for the library system. I can tell you, when I first started talking about this within the library system, people got a little, librarians like, well, hang on now, like, this is my job. This is what I get paid to do, right? And so I think that is a thing that I really hope will become something really amazing. The second thing is then around the organizations, right? Finding new and interesting ways to partner with organizations. So I'm gonna lift up one example, and then I'll pass the baton on. There is about 2 miles from us an organization known as ArtUp. And ArtUp is an incubator for the kind of the creative entrepreneurs who are in our city, and they do amazing work. And they came to us some time back and said, hey, we recognize that we're not meeting all the needs of the people that we want to meet. That there are parts of the community that we're not able to access, but we recognize that those people are coming through your doors every day. How might we work together? How might we partner together to be able to meet the needs of these individuals? And we said, hey, yes, absolutely. Those individuals are coming in our doors every day. People are coming and asking librarians, hey, can you help me with this tax document? Can you help me get this grant off the ground, right? And while we do have some knowledge of that, we don't have it all, right? And so this partnership now is going to create a space where we're going to actually carve out a physical space for this organization to come and do work. And we feel like these are the sorts of things that kind of radically transform how the library exists and operates in the community.
That's great. Thank you so much, Shamichael. Desa, love to have you add to the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. This is Desa. Like I said earlier, I use she, her pronouns. In my Zoom tile, you can see a white woman with long blonde hair wearing a hot pink shirt sitting on a back porch with a brick wall. And what I just did is called a visual description. This allows people with low vision or blindness to have equal access to the information that those of us who see can see on the Zoom screen right now. So it's a little trick of the trade of making things more accessible and inclusive that I invite all of you to practice on your own and to try on even today. Another thing you'll hear me do is say my name before I speak each time, and that is for ASL interpreters or caption users to know who it is that's speaking. Otherwise, it's just a wall of text from the captions and not actually that useful. So another trick of the trade I invite you all to try on and use in your life. As was said, I'm the Director of Detroit Disability Power, which is a relatively new organization. We're about 3 years old. I'm going to tell you briefly why I started this organization, but our primary goal is to build power, the power of the disability community. And I'm specifically talking about political power and organizing power. If you look at quality of life indices, disabled folks are at the bottom of every single one of them, particularly disabled folks with other marginalized identities due to other systems of oppression like racism, sexism, and xenophobia. So, there's nothing inevitable about that. There's no reason that disabled folks need to be at the bottom. I don't think anyone should be at the bottom. But I think that the part of the way that ableism, which is the systemic discrimination of disabled people, the part of the way that ableism works is it tricks us into thinking that, of course, disabled people are at the bottom. Of course, they can't see, they can't hear, they can't walk. Like, of course, they're going to have lower life outcomes. That's BS. That's called ableism. So strike that from your mind, and use your creative thinking and problem solving skills to imagine a world where that's not actually the case. I promise you that's possible. And in my estimation, the only way to get us there is to build political power and then to exercise that power. So that's what we focus on at Detroit Disability Power. We also offer anti-ableism workshops. We do all sorts of issue campaigns, getting disabled folks to vote. We're really, really all about showing up in force for justice, not only for disabled folks, but for all marginalized groups. And of course, the disability community is super diverse. So in addition to all the diversity of the various thousands of types of disabilities, we're also part of every other community, right? We have a race, we have a gender, we have a citizenship status, a sexual orientation, right? Like those things also exist for us. And so I say it kind of like that because people tend to forget. People just think, oh, you're disabled. That's true. But I'm also, like a lot of other things, just like everyone else. And really got into this work because I am a disabled person, and I have been my whole life. I'm a wheelchair user. I'm a little person, about 3.5 feet tall, which literally and figuratively gives one a different perspective of the world. People forget that you should paint the underside of bookshelves. Some of us actually see those things, right? And so, I think that growing up as a kid that was very obviously different than every single person around me, and was navigating a world that was not accessible, right? So the Americans with Disabilities Act on this coming Monday will turn 31. I'm older than that. And even to this day, we haven't fully lived into the promise of the ADA, the civil rights and infrastructure access that were guaranteed by law. So I went to schools that were not accessible. I did all the things growing up that weren't accessible. And those experiences were so obviously unfair to me, right? Like it was so obvious to me that like I should be able to go to school without having to be carried upstairs. right? I should be able to get to my class by myself, or I should be able to participate in various programs my school offered. And so that kind of obvious experience of the world that was designed for some people to succeed and for some people not to just got in my head by the time I was 5 or 6 years old. And I understood pretty quickly thereafter that it wasn't just disabled folks who were experiencing this inequity, right? I saw it happening to students of color in my schools. I saw it happening to LGBTQ kids who were terrified to come out in the 90s. And I realized, like, wow, all this stuff is connected. Like, some people are in charge and the rest of us exist here. And that's not cool with me. Like, I'm not okay with that. And so I really appreciate how the physical barriers of disability access or inaccess can help show how this stuff is intentional, and that it can be changed. I think disability experience can be a good way for non-disabled, maybe non-otherwise marginalized folks to start understanding systemic barriers and oppression. And so I, like everyone else, grew up in the context of ableism. So even though I'm disabled, even though I had extremely supportive parents, they're not disabled. They don't really know. And so I also internalized some of those things, and I've been unlearning that as an adult. And, I was drawn to social justice because of my experiences and the observations of connectedness and intersectionality that I just mentioned. And I started working, I've been very fortunate for my entire career to work in social justice organizations. But what I kept finding was that I was the only disabled person in the spaces, right? Like, there were definitely other people around who were not out about their disability, who didn't speak from that perspective, right? I didn't even know they were there. I'm sure they were. But in terms of obviously disabled people or politicized disabled people, or even people who cared about disability and ableism, I would be in these amazing organizations or campaigns where people had like a killer race, class, gender analysis, and then they would come to ableism and they'd be like, I got nothing. And I thought, well, this is a shame, not only for disabled people, but all the rest of y'all missing out on what we have to offer, which is a lot. And part of the reason we have a lot to offer is because we've been surviving, existing, navigating this world that was built without our needs in mind at all. And so after being like pretty bummed and pretty angry about some of the marginalization I was facing, even in social justice land, I thought, well, damn, somebody needs to start a disability justice organization and like really not only build power, but push our own movement spaces to be better. After about 10 years of being mad, I did that in 2018 and started Detroit Disability Power. So, the work we do is extremely collaborative. I think that's really important. I really love what Shamichael was saying about the, community assets, collaboration with different organizations. I also really love what you said, Shamichael, about uplifting the history of resistance. That's super important. And most people don't know anything about the history of the disability rights or justice movement. I didn't until I started looking into it on my own. And so, real interested in sharing that history. And I will drop something in the chat in a moment on that note. And then last thing I'll just say real quickly, because I know we want to get to Q&A, is that, ableism operates in the ways that other systems of oppression operate in some ways, right? So ableism operates at the personal level in terms of our beliefs and feelings. It operates at the interpersonal level in terms of how we interact with folks, what language we use, how we treat folks. It operates at the institutional level, which is where I think there's so much room to dig in and change, have a snowballing effect of institutional change, really adding up across institutions in a place, and holding each other accountable to those kind of changes. And then ableism also operates at the cultural level. So we we have to dismantle ableism at all of these levels. There's no shortage of work to do. And Detroit Disability Power does focus on all four of those levels. If you're interested in any of that, we want you to join us because to Shamichael's earlier point, like what comes out of community is always better than what comes out of a handful of staff people. So we are a membership organization. You don't have to be disabled to join. You just have to be a fighter for disability justice, or even a baby fighter for disability justice, and we'll move you up the ranks.
Thank you, Desa, so much. This is Ellie. So I am going to kick things off with maybe just one question to start, and I'm sure folks have some other questions. Both Desa and Shamichael talked about sort of an asset-based approach to how you're looking for folks to share this work and to help drive this movement forward. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how to some of the ways in which you help to build alignment with other organizations and help, folks to recognize what their sort of superpower is and how to get involved, knowing that sometimes we have self-doubts about if we're not, at the front of the charge, what we have to contribute. So I would love to hear about some of the ways in which you help to build, help lift other people up and help to empower them to be part of the movement.
This is Desa, I can jump in. So, part of organizing should always be leadership development. If we want to build sustainable movements, it cannot be egocentric. It has to be really about shared power. And it has to be about thinking ahead to, what do we want the generations after us to be able to do? And how do we train those folks up and get folks in the pipeline? There's, I should have said this a moment ago, that there's 128,000 disabled Detroiters. It's 128,000 folks who have in some ways been neglected in our city for a long time. Out of those 128,000, 106,000 are African American, and a majority are women. So by virtue of our existence, these are all very intersectional issues. And, quick story, the disability rights movement in the US for a long time was led by and focused on the issues of white physically disabled men. And no shade to those folks, but that doesn't represent the diversity of our community in any way. And so you can see that what the disability rights movement focused on for generations under that kind of leadership was super important, right? We got the ADA, we got the Architectural Barriers Act, we got the Rehab Act, right? But it wasn't addressing the criminal legal system, right? It wasn't addressing poverty in a substantial enough way. And so the understanding the lived experiences of community, understanding that people closest to the problem have the best solutions to said problems really is what organizing should be about. And it should be developing leaders in the process and bringing in more and more people all the time to build power.
Ellie again. I'm afraid we lost Shamichael, so hopefully his internet cooperates. That's why we need community tech. So Desa, maybe I'll just use this opportunity to follow up with one more question. Looking at this, oh, I'm sorry, I think I got muted. Looking at the scale of change that you and Shamichael are looking to enact, and just the weight of history and policy that you're working against, how do you keep up the motivation? How do you sort of celebrate wins along the way? And how do you keep people engaged in sort of this bigger movement, knowing, how much work it is?
This is Desa. Thank you for that question. There was a lot of questions in that question. So, I'm motivated because I care about people, and I look around and I'm like, this isn't good enough. There's too many people excluded. There's too many people suffering, and I cannot exist and just let that happen. So that's kind of where my motivation comes from. The other part of where my motivation comes from is I get pissed constantly on my own behalf, right? I move through the world and I'm like, well, this doesn't work for me. nobody thought about wheelchair users in this moment. There's no ASL interpreter here. Like all of those things, like when you turn on that lens, I don't know that it can be turned off. I wouldn't turn it off. But I think those are motivating things. And for me, it's a balance of really using my anger in a productive way and also really taking care of myself. Like, and part of disability justice culture, which I'll also share a link about that in a minute, disability justice really requires us to meet people's needs. And part of being human is needing to take breaks. Part of being an organizer is needing to be in it for the long haul and having sustainable practices so that you don't burn out by the time you're 27. Organizing culture is, I think, one of the least accessible, least humane environments that we have, unfortunately. So we have a lot of work to do to alter that culture, where we do understand people's boundaries and what their health and mind can actually handle. We are humans, we're not machines. So I could talk about this all day, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. This is Ellie again. I'd love to open up the floor if we've got other questions here. I know some people were nodding their heads and really feeling affirmed by that comment about need for self-care. Anybody would like to direct questions to Desa or Shamichael or both, or just respond to some of what we've heard? Sean, please go ahead.
I don't know about anyone else, but this is definitely a lot to kind of process a little bit. First off, I'd like to thank you guys for giving us that info. I don't know how to put this. So I deal mostly in the multimedia space with AGI, and most of my clients, I'm dealing mostly with just their tech stuff. For a little while, I was doing a little bit of work with the Lions Club in Detroit. And so I guess, I don't know if this is a question or a statement. This is actually more of a statement, but it's basically how, I've always had a problem with how to, since I'm dealing with virtual reality, XR, and all these new, and nice technologies. Oh, by the way, my name is Sean Lewis. I forgot to do that part. I'm in a purple shirt in a dark room, I guess. I forgot to do that. Sorry about that. But how do we tell these stories? Like, how do you guys tackle there's two questions. One is, how do you tackle trying to tell a story in that multimedia space? Where really people only have like a 5-minute span, right? 5-minute attention span, 9 times out of 10. And then the second one is, how do you actually, or what resources are there in order to help people make it more accessible? Because Desa, you're right. A lot of times we don't really, at least for me, until I dealt with the Lions Club and we were talking about how to bring in visually impaired people, I was like, I don't know, and I've been doing it for a long time. So it's, luckily I was able to find some of those resources, but how would someone actually find these resources and how to make their things more accessible, I guess,
This is Des. I can quickly tackle the second question. There are quite a lot of things on the internet that can give good guidance on accessibility in terms of media and social media. Actually, next week we'll be releasing something we're calling the Social Justice Access Toolkit, which is a compilation of those kind of resources, because we get asked this question like every day. And so we're just publishing something. But also, for those who need a deeper dive, we have a disability access consulting program, which is a fee-for-service program where we can actually help in any kind of institution, whether it's a city government or a nonprofit or a business or whoever, kind of like evaluate their processes and procedures and make recommendations for increased access and inclusivity. Some of it's super easy stuff and some of it's much more complicated, but I promise it's worth it. So if you're interested, Sean, I can follow up with you with the toolkit, and I can also put a link to the access consulting stuff in the chat.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anyone else interested in asking a question before we move on to the activity part? Cezanne?
Hi, this is Cezanne. I am a middle-aged woman who is Black, and I have salt and pepper gray hair that's currently all pulled back in a ponytail, and I wear glasses. And my question is, I guess, for both of you, and maybe to start with Shamichael, around how do you sort of think about organizational change and transformation within this spot? Because organizational, I'm thinking about what Desa said about movement culture being sort of sometimes very awful to the people who are trying to do the liberatory work. And I sort of feel that same way about nonprofit culture, and I have my own angst about that, but institutions still seem to be trapped in kind of hierarchy and power. And so what were like those difficult conversations that you were having internally to sort of be better partners at the table with community? Like, what were those things that you had to come correct with yourself with in order to sort of actually do good work with others? Perhaps that's like a hard question to unpack, but that's like my question. It's like, where do you start?
Yeah, this is Shamichael. Yeah, that is a really a great question. Yeah, for us, or at least for me, it really has tried to be, again, going back to that asset view of the community, right? I talked earlier, and this is, where we kind of had some contested conversations in the library again, where I was just asking library managers to acknowledge the power that they had. And like I said, hey guys, you all are setting the agenda for what happens in your library for the entire community. What work have you done that that adequately reflects that the things that you are getting ready to do, or the programs that you're getting ready to have, that actually is what the community wants, needs, desires, and so that was, and again, that's a hard conversation to have, because libraries, I think because of how libraries are viewed in the community, it's kind of, these goodwill ambassadors providing information and access, that it can be hard for some of those conversations to happen. But we're just kind of lay it bare, another thing that happened kind of recently, in light of the pandemic, we took all of our library programming online. And I think I may have shared this before, so if I did, please forgive me. We took all of the library programming online. And one of the programs that we did was in partnership with an organization out west, called Vote by Design. Some of y'all might be familiar with Vote by Design. Came out of the D school, and the goal of the program, or the initiative, was to really engage first gen voters, and to kind of walk them through thoughts and principles around what are you looking for in a candidate, kind of beyond the politics. Looking for someone who's going to reach across the aisle. You're looking for someone who's empathetic, who's a strong leader. These sorts of things. And the way that program was designed is, there are a lot of, you're kind of going back and forth between a lot of different tabs. You're answering questions. You're participating in kind of Slido, doodle polls, that sort of thing, right? And it works very well if you're doing that from a laptop. But if you're doing that from a cell phone, it's a much different experience, right? And in a city like Memphis, where we've got, we flirt traditionally with around 30% poverty, and we know that many of the people who actually do have access to internet have it because of their phone. That's a problem, right? And that means, okay, well, hey, maybe it's not just this program. Maybe it's a whole bunch of other library programs that we need to look at and say, hey, is this accessible to everybody? Are we assuming that people have high-speed internet? Are we assuming that people have laptops and desktop computers? Because if that's the case, then we need to go back and revisit some things.
This is Desa. Real briefly, I think it's an excellent question. And for me, being the director of an organization gives me the ability and opportunity to try some things. And, you know, that intentionality has been really important to creating a culture where people can bring their whole selves. So much of my life, and I know this is not just true for me, but many of you, like, I can't show up as my full self. It's not really permitted. And so to create a disability justice organization where people can show up in their fullness does require intentionality and a paradigm shift from our normal capitalist way of thinking of work and productivity. And so for me, those disability justice principles that I shared in the chat are things that we lean into, right? They clearly say to us, the work has to be sustainable, or you're excluding disabled people. You know, our body minds are kind of a canary in the coal mine, right? Like, no one should be working 12 hours a day. Some of us can fake it for longer than others, but disabled folks can't necessarily fake that, right? And so I actually think there's tremendous wisdom that comes out of our community about what's more healthy and sustainable for all humans and the planet. And I think pace is a huge part of that. One of the things when I hear about nonprofit cultural problems often has to do with pace and workload. And you know, I know that it's very hard for me. Like, I'm a type A person. I'm a you know, an Enneagram 3, if anybody knows about Enneagrams. So like pushing back on this productivity way of doing things is very counterintuitive to me, but I know it's more sustainable and healthy. And so I just try to do everything I can in my organization. We have every Friday off in our org. People get paid the same as if they worked 5 days a week, but we only work 4 days a week. That was on purpose. And like, I could share a lot more things like that, but that's just one example.
This is Nellie. Thank you, Desa and Shamichael. You know, I think that those are both, you know, just really great, you know, things to consider and, you know, things to be aware of. And again, you're absolutely right. If you're not taking care of yourself at the end of the day, there's no way that it's sustainable. And so I think that message is really helpful for a lot of the folks in the room, as well as all of the great links and resources that have been added into the chat here. So thank you to everybody for contributing to that. We'll make sure to share those and capture those with the final video. I want to just thank Desa and Shamichael again so much for joining us today and for sharing a bit of the story with us. As always, there's never enough time to really dive in deep. And I know we're trying to cover a lot of materials, but I think you know, there were a lot of parallels between the messages that you had and your experiences and you know, the great work that you are doing to really support transformation and change in your communities. So thank you both so much for joining us.